What's up, everybody? You're listening to another episode of the SignatureCAST, where we talk bodybuilding, business, and everything in between. My special guest today, member at Signature Fitness, Mr. Andy Triana. Go Super Brain. We're about to get super. We're about to get crazy. We got a couple of personalities here. How you feeling, bud? Thanks for coming on.
I'm feeling awesome. Really excited to be on here, Will. Love training at Signature Fitness, and this feels like a logical conglomerate now.
Yeah. It's about to get super. We're going to leave it at that. So first and foremost, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm very, very excited about this. You know, we've had some small discussions in the past. I learned a little bit about what you do, but I think for the people at home and for anyone who hasn't heard about Go Super Brain, the performance vibe and all those things, we're about to blow some minds and really bring some great information to the people at home. So Andy, who are you? And give us a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis.
I guess in simplest terms, you could say I'm a meathead with an obsessive personality when it comes to research. But on a daily basis, I kind of help people in the simplest way. I have the Performance Vibe, which is my LLC and, soon to be something else, but it's my LLC for all my private clientele. So anyone that is, maybe a professional athlete, a well-known or iconic business figure, or anything in between, that's what the Performance Vibe is for. It's kind of on the back end. You can't find much about it, and that's on purpose. And amidst that, I kind of missed interacting with people, helping the general public, and I would love to say creating content, but I'm terrible at that because I never do it. But I just missed interacting with people, and that's what Go Super Brain came to be. Go Super Brain's like my public proxy for doing consults, interacting with people, having support systems for anyone out there that is looking for them. And through that, I have that private podcast that I extend only to past consultees. So whenever you sign up for a consultation with Go Super Brain, you get put onto an email list and you get access to a private podcast I do once a week. Maybe not as much podcast. I call it Super Brain Radio, more of a radio show because I'm the only one talking. And it goes in a sequential order of episodes. So it's kind of like a chapter book that I read to you weekly in my own verbiage.
I love that. That's pretty awesome. I mean, especially it's a great way to reach out to people. And, this is the new platform. I feel like no one's going to really listen to the radio in the next 10, 15 years. It's going to be like straight podcasts,
Yeah, it's moving quick, and podcasts are still early in their birth. I spoke with Carl Lenore, who was currently the first, I believe, fitness podcast out there.
Okay.
He was one of the first people on the podcast platform to talk fitness, sports performance, and all that stuff. And I think it's less than 2 decades.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I mean, radio's been around for crazy amount of time, but this is where we are. We're here. We're at Signature Fitness. And I want to thank you again. You mentioned that you like training here. It is a really pretty awesome facility. This is my, my plug. Thankfully you were able to join our new strength conditioning center, and we're really trying to push the boundaries here, really get this to be the top, facility in all areas, which I think is just goes to show that you enjoy training here.
Yeah, no, it's definitely moving along. I like to train in a lot of different domains. I like to be versatile, and I train maybe some sports performance creatine work specifically. Like you see me do my jump days and throw days where I'll just be jumping and throwing for 75 minutes. I like to lift heavy. I like to do strongman. I like to participate in all facets of sports performance. And you can do that here at Signature Fitness.
Yeah, come Signature Fitness. Back to you, Andy. So I want to know a little bit more about your upbringing, what got you to where you are now. I know we've talked a lot about that. You're a huge supporter and competitor in Strongman. You love the sport. So what are some achievements that you would say either through education, your own personal performance, that you're really proud of and that have molded you to where you are now?
Awesome question. One resounding one comes to mind, and I want to talk all about one story and neglect some of the other things. So I'll start with early on in college, I already realized I had a little bit of a gift for the sports performance stuff, not just the coaching and maybe even the performance, but actually understanding the science and being able to apply it to a real life scenario. I noticed I was really good at that. So from that point on, I just actually kind of dove in, and it seems like maybe now in retrospect a little bit of cliche advice, but every dollar I made, I reinvested in myself. I actually took minimal advice from other people on what to do about it. I got offered earlier in life, a lot of very good jobs that I turned down to continue running my own businesses because I just had like this somewhat blind faith in what I was doing and that it would work out. But I guess kind of like a perfect pinnacle story that summates all these things was my very first Worlds in Strongman was 90 kilo. I was underweight and I took fifth, and I was horrifically angry about it. I took it like, it's funny looking back
Personal.
now. Yeah, looking back now, it's something you should be proud of on any level. Being top 5 in the world is a huge deal. But I wanted to win so bad that I took it as like a disdainful loss. And for years, I kind of was like really down on myself about it. I was like, you messed this up. You could have done so much better. And it's funny, that's something that I actually help a lot of people with now. Is it's so easy to get in your own head and more so attach a connotation to something that shouldn't have a connotation. You know, if even for 1 minute I took that time to be objective about what I did, I could have been proud, and that actually would have changed my next couple of steps in my strongman career. You know, that actually, I was so resentful about it that I decided to cut to 175. And it messed up my blood work really, really badly to the point I had a bunch of injuries. And I'm actually kind of still in the way dealing with some of those repercussions today, like 3-4 years later, because injuries lead to other injuries, lead to this, lead to that.
Yeah.
And it's funny because Go Super Brain is about having information about your own brain to make better decisions. So when I originally realized, you know, I'm a social guy, that I wanted to do something with the public again, I just started asking people questions. I'd be like, hey, like, man, what do you know about the brain? Like, if I tell you like to think of 3 things I have to do with your brain, what do you think of? And I always joke that the most common answers I got were caffeine make me go fast, concussions are bad, and like I have shitty memory. Like those are the top 3 answers.
So common,
right? So I was like, you know what? There's a gap here. And then I saw that in myself too. I was like, you know, I've made all these poor decisions in the past because I put connotation in my own performances in places I shouldn't have. And that's kind of what Go Super Brain, and I'm hoping grows into over time. It's still very new. It's not even a year old yet. But I'm hoping over time it grows into a education platform for people to make better decisions, not just mentally, but physically and with their brain, because your mind is different than your brain. That's a very important delineation.
You know, do me a favor, because I'm genuinely curious. I know that's a really loaded question, but a couple ways that your mind is different than your brain.
No, it's not a loaded question. It's funny. I guess when you develop viewpoints, you can see the differences between things better, rather than if you're not so informed on something. Let's say someone's like just getting into the nutrition world and you're, hey, what's the difference between mayo and olive oil? And you look at the label, you're like, oh, I can't really tell, right?
Yeah.
But we know they're different,
Yes.
right? So as you learn, you could see things more separately from each other. And the mind is this metaphysical, personality, human-related thing. And it has more to do with behavior and has more to do with second and third order actions and outcomes after like a hormonal cascade or something, rather than the brain is the actual organ that has neurons, that has sections, that deals with electricity, that's connected to your eyeballs and your spinal cord.
Thank you. A very good explanation. No, I love it. No, it's really cool because, and we're going to get into so many really interesting pathways here, but I'm actually going to fast forward to one of my later questions because we talked about this once, and I'm really curious. You know, you seem to be a very high energy, you know, high performance individual, and we just said that you had a great night's sleep, so now you're like feeling really good. And I struggle with sleep a lot, and you know, thankfully things are getting better, but. You know, I've always wondered that if I had some form of, you know, ADD, ADHD, something along those lines, because like focusing is like a huge, huge issue for me. But knowing that you're kind of this, you're developing yourself into this because of all your research, this like kind of brain hacker in a way. You know, is there any tests you could run on me or like verbal thing you could just figure out? Like, because we talked about, like you said earlier, you know, I'll take caffeine and I do the exact opposite of most people. Like I can take like 500 milligrams of caffeine, and instead of being like this, I'm like zoned in, locked in a box. Versus I know people who drink like a cup of coffee and they're bouncing off the walls.
That's me.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah.
No. Yeah. I'm like before this, I chugged like a 300 milligram caffeine. Now I also take in too much caffeine, so my you know, tolerance is very high. But you know, instead of getting me jittery or whatever, it's just like the only way that I can like look at the screen and get things done. Versus, you know, without it, I'm just like kind of like every 5 to 10 minutes, I'm like on a different subject, and I have to play this roller coaster where I'm like taking stops along the way versus like completion. You know?
Totally. So the first portion of that answer has to do with perspective. And this is what fogs a lot of brain research for people. So like the common one that comes to mind is like when people talk about fat burners and like dopamine and norepinephrine and stuff. And it's like, oh man, that would make me feel terrible. Like you can take some type of fat burning supplement and gain weight and like have water retention issues. And you could have the exact opposite. And it begets the question, what's going on under the hood? And when we look what's going on under the hood in the brain when it comes to focus, lack of focus, sleep, everything amidst that, it's that we all have different responses to the same hormones. So if norepinephrine, because it can be a blood hormone or a neurotransmitter in your brain, but let's say it's a neurotransmitter in the brain, because that's what we're talking about here, that can facilitate anxiety in one person and can facilitate focus in another. So what in your scenario, especially with people that have like that ADD, ADHD type thing where multitasking is kind of like a baseline, but for them to get to singular horse blind or focus, they need that rise, tends to be that you thrive under that dopaminergic response and that you're trying to develop one by dealing with 5 or 6 different things. And caffeine as a supplement can facilitate those super physiological dopamine levels. So it's more that when you just get to this threshold of dopamine, that's when you perform your best. And it's funny, that threshold concept and identifying it, I use it with all of my athletes as well as like business professionals, because you have to know specifically what your success and excellence points are. And that was actually some of the best advice I ever got when it came to business. He was like, Andy, before you make any business steps, set out exactly what success and excellence are and just chase them so that you are aware of it, you know? So it's the same thing here. Let's say, you know, it's whether it's a caffeine range, whether it's a heart rate range, or whether it's sports performance. And it's like, I need a certain work capacity in this specific energy system to do what I do. I don't need to just get on the treadmill, or maybe you do if it's that energy system for you. But let's say you want to get better at recycling creatine. Walking on a treadmill is not going to get you better at that. And if you need to get better at moving fatty acids under a low heart rate, then the treadmill will get you better at that, you know?
And it's really cool to hear you say that, because as you said, you know, when I'm focusing on 5 or 6 different things, it puts me in that mind state. And I think that's also why in like high risk reward, high like demanding scenarios, I'm usually like super laser focused. Like at a powerlifting meet, like when I used to compete, like people would be like, "Where's my stuff?" And I would just be like so calm and collected, and like I knew exactly what to do, because I was just like, my heart rate might be like super elevated, but I was like, I'm good. Like I know what I have to. It was like the world got shut out, and I was like, I'm focused. I know what to do. Versus on like a day-to-day emails and this and that, whatever. I'm just like, what am I supposed to do right now?
Because it's not nearly stimulating enough for you to get to that threshold of productivity you need to get to.
Yeah.
So if I was to talk to you about something, it would be, well, let's improve your basement. How much work can you get done at 60 to 80% productivity? You know what I mean? Because you don't, like, it's obviously just like training. It's like, it's unreasonable to get to like your peak arousal state every time you go train. That's a bad idea. And far too many people do that in the workplace, because it feels good, right? You know what I mean? The same way that like, if you get pissed off at a session or something for a couple minutes, it feels really good. You're like, oh, I'm going to come back and show everyone. And then like 30 minutes later, you're like, oh my God, I feel terrible. My stomach hurts. Why? And then that's why.
Oh, I mean, especially for me, I see it that if I'm super focused in, like you had just mentioned, like I like to finish my day, and I don't do this very often, but like if I make my checklist and I like get through, you know, let's say like 60% of it, I'm like, that's a win, you know, for that day. And it's almost like never do I get with my normal day-to-day routine like 100% through. And it's just really interesting because even in my own workout programming and everything like that, I used to try to, like I trained with Sean, Mr. Olympia, who comes here a lot. And how he does what he does, I have no idea, because he is in that state, that like euphoric, but like zoned in 100% physically every single workout, to the point of like muscular failure, but beyond, you know what I mean? Every day. And I'm like, but then I look at him the rest of the day, and he is like a zombie.
Different person.
Different individual, different personality, everything. And I think like kind of, and maybe this is true, you know, I think the only way he can sustain that 2 hour, like 100% rev go is to be a sloth the rest of the day. Like,
most of it. That's also the professional athlete paradox.
Yes.
I've spoken to professional athletes in golf. I guess somewhat you can consider it card playing a sport to a degree.
Sure.
But anyone who's a professional at anything has these massive peaks and valleys. But don't forget, Sean's been participating in bodybuilding as a professional for a long time.
over 20 years.
So he's titrated himself to this over time, and he's developed everywhere from enzymes to mental capacity to brain capacity, which we already said was different. He's developed his body to do this. You know what I mean? So even half of it's anticipatory because he's done it successfully so many times that all of a sudden that as he gets to the gym, because he's such a high-level professional, he's actually starting to secrete training enzymes before he gets to the gym. This actually happens in a microcosmic way with our stomachs. If you eat every single day, and it's relative to the sun, not the time on the clock, at the same exact time. So if you were to travel to California, even if like the 3 hour difference was there, but it was the same time on like the sun's clock, so to speak, you could secrete insulin from your pancreas anticipatorily to the meal if you've done this enough. And that's one of the old myths that's kind of true in bodybuilding, that if you eat at the same time, it matters. It kind of does. So we can anticipate stuff with enough like history, if you will, to a very high level in a lot of things.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of the whole, sometimes if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But we always are on this journey to like validate why it works. And I feel like sometimes it's okay. I mean, of course we want to know, but sometimes it's okay to not know. It's just like, hey, eat your meal at the same time every single day, no matter where you are. Like they eat like a dog, you'll look like a dog. Like they never gain weight. They always stay in good shape. Blah, 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 blah. You know that. I mean, I know I'm bringing it down to like a much more basic understanding, but that's the key, the kind of the key to some of these things is just like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But then if it's something complex, like find someone who can look under the hood and we can figure out what's going on. But why the brain? What gave you the obsession, you know, and like, you know, it's called Go Super Brain. You know, you're all about, you know, figuring out what's going on underneath the blood work in your and how people work from day to day. What created this fascination you have with people and, you know, in between the years?
Three things specifically, all super different from each other, ironically. The first is when I was coming up through school, I always heard people say, oh, it's all about the brain. It's all about the brain. And I'd be the one person be like, well, what do you mean by that? And they'd be like, oh. And like,
That was their answer?
Yeah, well, essentially, like, would just like spew some crap, you know, that wasn't actually telling me. Like, so it came down to like, if you're going to say it's all about the brain, you have to know why. If you're going to say like that powerful of a statement, so I realized I was like, well, if no one knows what's going on, like I want to know. Like, if I don't believe that you're lying when you tell me it's all about the brain. You know, I've heard it from a lot of different people who are well respected in the field, but that like lack of the next step, well, I was like, well, what's the hidden secret then, you know? The next one was the study of phenomenology. It's a philosophical study of the difference between your individual perception and what's called object-based reality. So like what actually happened outside of your own like bias. So it's cool because like, for example, let's say you get into an argument with your significant other and no one else is in the room. You have your version of it, they have their version of it, and what actually happened never happened. Think about that for a second. It's true, right?
Wait a second. That's right. Unless you put like a video camera in the room.
You can't escape your perception, you know? Wow. Like I've had one of my favorite stories I've probably told on a few podcasts by now, but it never gets not funny to me.
Yeah.
I was working with a professional athlete, and I won't forget the last point, but I was working with a professional athlete, and we were just like working on his nutrition and stuff, and he was hitting like this phase in life where he was like really catching fire now, and we were 2 weeks out or so, or 3, something like very close to an outing he was going to have. And he's like, Andy, I figured it out. It's all about potatoes. I was like, sorry? He's like, yeah, I've been eating white rice and it's been ruining me. But this week I switched to potatoes and everything's going so much better. And I was just like you kind of said that sometimes if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's like, wow. I was like, you know, wow, man, you're right. Yeah. Screw white rice. Oh my God. Yeah. Potatoes. Just like let him go on. Like it worked really well for him. Right. And then it's funny because he never brought it up again, which makes it even funnier to me. So I guess he's back on the white rice now. But the last thing that got me, and this is probably the most bona fide reason, was why do 2 different programs work differently for two different people if they're like similar people and should be the same? And how come I can do the same program twice and get totally different results?
That's a great point. Well, I mean, it kind of goes back to what you said is your body's ever changing and being different. So, Sean 15 years ago is not Sean 10 years ago and not Sean 5 years ago and not Sean today.
But let's say we had the ability to create two Seans, right?
Okay.
And we had him go through a workout once here on a Monday, and we put it scientifically so it's exactly the same. Why is it on the next Monday it's not exactly the same? Even if we could cut out adaptation. Let's say we give him a bunch of aspirin.
So you mean like everything from the sleep to the food to the everything is exactly the same?
Yes. You can't have the same session twice.
Why is that?
Because when you break it down to the micro portions of it, everything's going to be different. So like your ability to contract over 8 reps, even if they look exactly the same, super slow, super perfect, they're not, because there's a slight increase in oxygen debt each rep. There's a slight change in who's recycling ATP, and there's a slight change in all this stuff. So even if you did the same exact session twice in all the same environments, it would be impossible to replicate.
So you're saying because your body itself is going to make different changes. Oh, essentially, like let's talk about like fuel systems. So you're saying like even within, like if you replicate it completely and you took in the same amount of carbs, fats, proteins, all those types of things, your body might decide the next week that it's going to utilize a few different from here versus there, because you at that level, that's all subconscious, and you can't physically, obviously, tell your body what to utilize.
Totally. So let's say you're doing like a heavy set, right? And you always know that point where it's either in between the sets or mid-set, the next rep gets really easy out of nowhere. You're just recruiting more electricity to a neuromuscular junction local. That's not the exact one, but a local one being recruited brings more stuff, quote unquote, hemodynamics, so like everything in your blood in the blood, actual electricity, energy to the area. So now the area is
I'm like smiling. I'm like mentally exploding right now.
Right? So the area gets hotter, like entirely. So it would just be impossible unless you controlled for mind and brain scenarios to be the same. So we got you to listen, maybe not the same song, but the same exact point of arousal, the same perception and the same respiration rate would be the only way you can try to have the same session twice.
And even then, you're still going to have variables.
And then think about the 3 things I just mentioned almost have nothing to do with biology.
Yeah.
That's all brain stuff and breathing. You know what I mean? That's the only variable you can control for to make it the same.
That's crazy. Wow.
So that's why I felt like I had to go the brain route then, because it was like, even the same thing with 2 strongman athletes prepping for the same show at similar maxes, I would have them check their heart rates in the middle of sessions. And I would see things, especially when they're peaking, like how's that heart rate so high and you're good? How's that heart rate so low and you're not recovered? Or all these micro differences. How is this like a strength session for you? And how is this a hypertrophy session for you, even though they're kind of the same? Like with the results we get, right? Some people are like, oh, I get huge doing 20 rep squats. Some people are like, oh, I get stringy and flat. Or you know what I mean? How can you have a hypertrophy response to this and this person has a strength response to this? Because we know all bodybuilders, especially at the highest level, look relatively similar.
Yes.
That's the point, right? But their strength levels are super different.
Yeah, and how they developed to that stage is super different.
And I see that in every single sport. Powerlifters, all similar strength in the top 20, right? All look like vastly different people.
Yes.
Every single thing. Golf, I'm working with a lot of golfers right now, and when I'm at these outings, it's like you would never be able to figure out who the golfer is.
What do you mean?
Like, you just can't tell. Some of them are jacked and tall. Some of them are skinny.
You mean physically?
Yeah. If you just,
okay.
obviously, because they're the ones golfing.
Yeah. I was like, Andy, I think they're the ones swinging the club.
Like, if you lined up a bunch of fans and a bunch of golfers, you would never be able to figure out who the professional athlete is without, talking, maybe taking some
Of course, but
data.
just visually.
Yeah, you would never be able to figure it out.
That's so interesting. And not to mention, just to touch back on the differences, you just said bodybuilders and how they all kind of relatively look the same. We're also not even taking into consideration chemically what they've done over all these years and all of the different things that they've intaked and life scenarios, but they still always end up at this final stage per se. But it really is fascinating how even something as simple as supplementation, like creatine works for some people, doesn't work for others.
Same exact thing, you know. Masteron or Draw Standalone's like the most debated one. And it's the same story over there. Some people it makes them flat. Some people it makes them huge. Some people it makes them strong. Some people it crashes their estrogen. Some people it makes their sexual health better.
Yeah.
You know, it's all this different stuff, and it's not you. It's not the compound. Like
It's how your body is absorbing and utilizing it.
Yeah, even in your own life, you could take the same thing twice and have totally different responses.
Sometimes you take ibuprofen, it works. Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my god! So wait, you had a third point though as to why you went with the brain.
Oh, so that was the third point, was the differences between people.
Oh, okay, great, awesome. Yeah. No, it is really crazy. Like, I think they've done a lot of studies about that. They did a lot of studies like that on twins, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, and what would happen if you put they got really dark too. You know, let's put one in a room and leave it alone, and then see what happens to the other one. And like social butterfly, that whole concept. But yeah, it's pretty. I love that. I think that's pretty great. I think you found a niche. Mm-hmm. Just stay in it, Andy. I think you're doing really well at it.
Thanks, man.
We talked a little about it earlier. You know, I don't know if you call yourself this, but you're kind of like a brain hacker in a way. You know, you look at people's blood work, you look at their day-to-day routines, how they're physically, emotionally acting, and all this stuff, how they're performing. So, if there was a key or a first step that you think everyone in their own lives should take to try to take better control of their mental and physical performance, what would it be? Would it be writing down the routine, or is there anything that you're like, this is the staple that I do with everyone? Like, if you're not doing this, you're wasting your time.
It's funny because, like, when you originally asked me, who am I, what do I do, I struggle to answer that question because for everyone I work with, I'm like a different person for them. Like, for some people, I just do chemistry stuff. For some people, I just do mind stuff. For some people, I literally do like almost physical therapy stuff. It's like, it's so much different for every single person. What I realized is, you know, pretty much everyone I work with has a lot of success. And I was like, well, what's the commonality here? I know the way I think is kind of like a little different in the first place, but it's being objective. And I know that sounds stupid, but so many people have either lack of information or completely biased ideas that start all of their goal-making processes. You know, it's like, oh, I broke up with my girlfriend or boyfriend, time to get lean. It's like, whoa, why are those, you know, like, sure, you could do those things, but they don't
shouldn't be correlated at all.
Yes, you know, and then people don't realize, like, hey, how come I'm 8 months into this program and everything's going wrong? And they think it's the program, they think it's them, and you start to look back and it's like, well, no offense, but your philosophy behind this was incorrect. And therefore, every time you adhered to that philosophy, every decision subsequently was also now incorrect. You know? So I think that if you're truly driven, you're going to get to where you want to get. And I tell everyone I work with, I tell them now, I'm like, look, you don't need me to be successful. You're going to do this already. We're going to make it better, but if you're truly driven to something, I am the person who has faith in pretty much everyone that they're going to do it. So then it starts to become a question of what's going to stop you and how many times are you going to hit your own thumb with the nail, you know? And then that same analogy I give back to people is if you did just hit your thumb with the nail, is it the hammer's fault or is it your fault?
That's a great question. Yeah. Are you aware enough to stop hitting yourself? Or are you just going to or are you going to find a device to hold the nail?
Yeah, you got to do something, but
you got to do something different.
You can't keep swinging.
Yeah.
Most people do.
Yeah.
Like you can't keep swinging. You have to move your thumb, get out of your own way, and look at things objectively.
Very interesting. So we talked about brain hacking. We talked about kind of who you are and what you do, but we're going to touch a little bit on mental and physical capabilities of the human body and species. And what you just touched on really reminded me of that because you said, you know, everyone can achieve, all of your clients can achieve whatever they want to, and most likely they will because they're so driven. So I used to work, I used to have a professor in college, and Dr. Dan Gilbert, he's a sports psychologist and mental performance coach. And, you know, he used to tell you have this equation for life, and I've mentioned it before on the podcast, but it's A plus ST plus GOIA equals R plus or negative. And all it is you have the ability to do whatever you want. You have to implement a strategy, get off your ass and do the strategy, and then you have a result, right? But the problem is everyone will look back when the result is negative and they say, I just can't do it. Instead of going back to their strategy and seeing if that was the issue, because 99.9% of the time, That's what it is. And the first mistake that everyone makes is like, I just can't do it. It's like, no, you just did it the wrong way. Or maybe you didn't get off your ass and complete it. So rather than looking back to the ability of, well, I just can't do it. I just can't lose weight. I just can't get strong enough. It's like, no, hold on. Why don't you try implementing a new strategy? Especially after what you just said, what works for one person could totally not work for another. And it's sad to hear that is where a lot of people falter, is they always go back to their ability. And he happened to have interviewed hundreds and hundreds of Guinness Book of World Record holders, and he would just ask, what is it that you did to make you achieve this? And he had this study over, a span of like 30 years. But I remember leaving that class, and I think my max squat was 500 pounds at the time. And I was like, I was so motivated and so mentally ready. I'm sorry for the viewers that have heard this like 10 times, but I picked up my buddy Rich and I said, we're going to go squat 600 pounds today. And my true 1 rep max was like 100 pounds less. And I walked into the gym, and for the first time in my life, I was just like, I am capable of doing so much more than what I think I could do physically. I'm like, because what's in between my 2 ears is what's controlling my body. Was that the smartest thing to do? Probably not. But we walked into an LA Fitness in Clifton, and I loaded up 1, 2, all the way up to, 6 plates and a 5 and 2.5, whatever it is. Came down, struggled a little bit on the way up, racked it, and walked out that gym. And ever since that day, I told myself, Will, especially physically, if there's something you want to achieve and accomplish, there's so much more inside of you and you don't realize it. And I think that like changes people over time. But do you think, that was my experience. Do you think there is a physical or mental limit, on the human body, or have we not even come near or close to knowing what it is?
I have like a hope and an answer in my mind, and they're actually the same, and I don't think we're anywhere close.
Okay.
I've worked with some of the most gifted professionals on the planet. I'm very super lucky to say that and know it's true in multiple domains, whether it's business or sports and different types of sports and domains. And they've all gotten to be the best in the world up until this point, not to be like arrogant working with me, using really subpar methods. And I'm like, wow, what's going to happen when we compound over 5 years together and then see what you're capable of? And then it's like, okay, well, that's even intervening later in life when you've already attained success. So what about if we took this like sophisticated method of coaching and had someone with a perfect parental upbringing, perfect exposure to sports, and then had that over generations? There's nowhere near a limit in our lifetime. And it's mental and physical, like you said. So let's say you said you did that with that 600-pound squat. Imagine if you could train yourself over time to access that part of your brain when you needed, and then you were able to do that successfully multiple times, and then what if you could physically manage your mind in this like synergistic balance and kind of do that with both things over time? What could you attain then? And maybe it's as reductionist as I have to say that so I can keep my job, or maybe it's as optimistic as saying like, there is more out there, we should keep pushing. But I also see it statistically. So it's not that world records have been upped by that much. They have, but it's more the basement of every sport has risen so high. And that's what tells us is really true, because previously, if you weren't just like this gifted freak, you weren't going to go professional in anything. But now, totally normal people with totally normal genetics can be professionals in sports.
Yeah.
So that is one of those things where it's like, wow, that ceiling, even if it's individual to you or me, you can only travel this much, let's say, and we start here, so you travel up here, and you start down here, so you can only travel to here. It's still telling us that there's a lot more left to go.
And you see it, I know you've competed much more than I have, but I've been a huge Strongman fan for many, many years. And Strongman 20 years ago versus Strongman now is like a different sport. These kids, now adults, like they've been like on diet plans. They've been on training plans since they were like maybe 15, maybe even some as young as like 10 or 12. You look at, I'm really pumped as long as he's healthy. Jerry Pritchett's son, Bubba, like he's like, I think he's like 11 or 12. Like he's super young. He's lifting these crazy weights. You know, he's on his diet. He like, you listen to this kid talk and he's so like motivated by his dad and he loves the sport. I'm like, there's a prime example of that basement just got risen to here. He's got I'm sure a decent gene, you know, set of genetics. So now like where does this go? You know, and then not to mention, we haven't even talked about what's happening scientifically, you know, in labs, chemically, things that they are inventing. You know, I know tons of strongmen now are getting super into healing themselves with stem cells, and that's, you know, elongating their professional career. So now that ceiling that they might have hit, they might be able to push it a little bit further because they can have more time under the bar. They can have more time developing themselves. So it is really mind blowing, not to sound cheesy, that like we don't even know.
Well, think about it this way. It's like, how many times have we seen people get better when they didn't try to get better too? You know, it's like, oh, I just hopped into this show for fun, had an amazing day. Or like you said, like that day you had no business maxing your squat based on a programming standpoint.
Did a week prior, by the way.
Oh, even better. So upped your squat 200 pounds in like 2 weeks.
Yeah, it was absurd.
You don't have to be in a physical state to mentally perform. And I think that's the biggest reason why that ceiling is going to be like the carrot no one ever reaches. Because I don't know if a human can like maximize both at the same time for extended periods of time. So if we look back in history, we have like the Greeks and we have Eastern cultured monks, right? Or Western. I always confuse that, whatever. But you get what I'm saying, right? Yes. So we have people who have over, you know, hundreds of years sought to gain mental like clarity, enlightenment, and mastery. And we have seen physical ones do the same, and both kind of forego the other. And when they get to that point of mastery, they have traits that are actually similar to each other, you know? So we know that through meditation and like martial arts, people have attained incredible strength and incredible physical abilities, realistically just like walking, starving, and like doing karate, right? And we also see like the highest level athletes have mindfulness, meditation abilities, and the horse blinder like abilities that are similar to people who meditate every single day. They might have never meditated in their life.
I was about to say, without even meditating.
Like think about Sean, for example. I don't know if he does or doesn't.
I don't believe, I'm pretty close. I don't think he meditates at all.
But he has that meditative like skill, adaptation, approach to his training where it's like, let's say you had 100 points of energy. The biggest difference between Sean and everyone else in the gym is he's using those 100 points of available ATP for the singular task.
Yes.
And everyone else is like using like 75 for training if they're lucky. And it's like 25s over here, you know, 10 of them are like scratching my balls. I'm on Instagram, you know, all this different stuff. I mean, one of the reasons why I enjoy powerlifting is because it's like you have to hydrolyze all your ATP on one rep. I think that's kind of cool. You know, I can find anything cool in the sports world, but it's that ability to completely dump everything from an ATP or a neurochemistry standpoint into a single task.
Yeah, I that's exactly what I talked about in the, not from the energy expenditure scenario, but just in general. We just had Devin Larrett on the podcast last week. And go check out that episode. It was awesome. But it was great. And he is, you know, super high level performing, best arm wrestler in the world up until a month ago. Right. And he was in the military, special forces, like the whole nine, like super high performer. Right. And I asked him because I think it's my life question or kind of one of my life messages I want to tell people is that if you push yourself to an absolute limit, I mean a real absolute limit, not like, oh, like, you know, like I hit a heavy set at the gym or, oh, like I worked for 48 hours straight. No, like to the point of where like, it's like life or death, that you'll be a better person afterwards because you know what it takes to achieve and to maybe not even achieve, but to push yourself to such a limit. Like the last time I competed, like it was the weights were so heavy, but it was just like you switched on into that mind state where it's going to kill me or I'm going to do it. And speaking with Devin, like he was in that, but like with, you know, in the military, like, no, like they're going to kill me or I'm going to kill them, which is a scary thought. But like, I feel like, respect to people who have like the military, obviously they deal with PTSD and all that stuff, but people who come back or who experience in powerlifting or whatever it may be, even in business, like you push yourself so hard, they're usually better people afterwards because they've finally recognized the capabilities within themselves. And I think that's something that more people need to do.
Totally. You even hear cancer patients who beat cancer saying stuff like that as well.
Yes.
It's more of the exposure to a challenge that seems insurmountable, and then you surmount it. And that's microcosmic for everybody. Some people have it in them that they need to go out on a battlefield. For some people, and this is why like being empathetic is important, because for some people, what Devin got on the battlefield might be just like getting out of bed every day for the certain type of person.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like maybe like not like, like doing anything terrible, that is different for every single person. But if you can surmount it, that experience, that perception change lasts forever. I remember one of the most iconic ones for me was I interned at Elite FTS for 16 weeks in college. Okay. I mean, it was like 17 or 18. It was quite a while, actually, for a college internship. And the very first training session, I went 7 days a week for that entire internship. I didn't take a single day off. And it was volitionally. They would even be like, Andy, you don't need to come in on the weekends. I'm like, nope, I'm here. I don't care. Like, I was like, oh my God, I'm getting
soaking it up.
Yeah, I got such a cool experience, Rest in peace, John Meadows. I got to train with him leading up to his pro card. That summer was when he did it. And I was like funny because I was like writing for them and I was in the gym with him on the weekends and would see him do it, but then would go back and like write about it. I got to do some super cool stuff. My first workout there, Dave Tate put me through one of those experiences. He made me squat until I physically could not move. And I remember I sat on the bench for must have been at least 40 minutes with like throbbing headache, losing my vision. I like stumbled out of the gym and like it messed me up for days. It was funny. But it was an exposure that like I was younger at the time. I was like 17 or 18. I had never or I guess older, but whatever. I'd never been to that part of my brain, and just going to that point, like he was screaming at me, it wouldn't let me stop. And I'm sure he knew I was the right person for that type of experience, but it was drastic for me in a positive way.
I want to. We're gonna go back 5 seconds. So right, it takes a certain individual because not everybody can experience that physically. Mentally, like you said, like it might be a mom or a dad of 5 kids, and they're like their experience is just like working for 6 months and putting food on the table because they had to work so hard, and then they can look back and say like, wow, I accomplished that. But yeah, like being in that physical place as the Arnold 2020, and we know everything was canceled, and they had and I love this story. They had we had like a miniature Arnold type animal cage thing at the time was, I can't remember the name of the Joe Sullivan had a gym out there, and we're like, oh, let's do like a squat contest, right? And I was like supposed to be the MC for the cage, and I was secretly like prepping to like squat 800 for 5. Like I was like super like focused and ready to go, and it didn't end up happening. But like, oh, let's have the squat contest, and all these people come in and they have these like, bodybuilders, blah 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 blah. And then like I'm sitting there at like 340, little chunky, and I was like, and there's gonna be $500 if you win. So I'm like, oh, I got this. And they're going, and it was like a freaking switch, and I hadn't felt it in so long. And it was 325 on the bar for reps, and I think I hit 46 or 47 reps, and I was just like, I dump it. Like they take it, and like you said, I'm sitting on the curb outside, just puked, the throbbing, the headache, the like things are going in and out, and I'm like, and they're like, here's your $500, man, I don't care about the $500.
Just like sitting there, like
just like in just crippling pain, but it was just like, what an experience it is to push yourself so hard. Guys, do it, please. Find something and do that.
So whenever I talk to someone, like, I encourage people to reach for those types of goals. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be every single day, but like pick something that changes you into the type of person you want to be.
Yeah.
And when they're talking about the degrees at which they should push themselves, I always say, like, no one sets out to slay a small dragon. In fact, people are probably going to laugh at your story if you come back. And say, like, Will could squat 800 for 5, but when the 315 for reps came around, he did 25 and said that was enough. Like, that wouldn't sound cool to anybody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, when you set out to attain a goal, you want to, like, barely get past it. Like, come back bloody with, like, your blood and the dragon's blood on it.
Yeah. They're like, oh, what a warrior.
Yeah.
And I think, what's really interesting, and I'm very curious to see if you've touched on this, the differences, though, with our Western mindset and the Eastern mindset. And do they, let me rephrase, have you worked with people outside of the Americas, of North America, South America, and Canada? Have you worked with people from, other countries?
Yeah, I've actually been lucky to work with someone on every single continent.
Cool. So that being the segue into the question, do you find, because of cultural differences, that they handle things differently than we do here?
So there's some commonalities amongst all athletes, and there are some differences. The commonalities that you wouldn't think are common are actually things like grit or things like attention to detail. Maybe you did expect them to be common, but that desire for more and that like relentlessness is definitely commonality across the world. I guess it doesn't make sense in a lot of ways, but it's what I expected, actually. Mm-hmm. The things that are different are what people fret over, actually. Like, in America, people tend to put a lot of emphasis on, like, food and drugs. Like, if your food's low, or it's like, oh, I'm starving. In other countries, I've noticed that people, like I said, fret over different things. Like, sometimes it's, like, real, but, like, sometimes it's, like, training opportunities. Like, I've talked to a lot of people in other countries who are like, Andy, I don't have access to being able to train what I want to train that many days a week. I would say another large difference in dealing with people from other countries is also gratefulness. People in America, I've noticed, or just in our area of the world, tend to be grateful to themselves more often for outcomes rather than grateful for things external to them. Like, I've noticed in other countries, people are a lot more grateful for, like, their support staff and
their
stuff.
camp and everything.
And it's funny because on Instagram, we always see that everyone's grateful for everything. But it's funny, I'm never on Instagram, and you probably know that already, and a lot of other people do, and actually get kind of upset at me every time. Now and then I'll get a comment, Andy, you haven't done anything in months. It's like, yeah, I know. But, like, I'm behind the scenes a lot with a lot of very, very well-known people, and that is not the case. People tend to blame the support staff first and then thank the support staff last. And that's not just support staff, like people helping them. It's like the greater word support staff, like their parents, their friends, their significant others, all that stuff. Sports tend to be much more of an inclusive family thing in other aspects of the world.
That's really interesting. I think, I would hope that that's something that we start to do more of, because, like, the phrase, like, it takes a village, it's so true, and I know I go back to him all the time, but I really do look up to Sean a lot. If it wasn't for, his significant other, Rosangela, if it wasn't for his brother, his family, everyone, like, being in his corner, his friends, like, we're going to the Olympia this year, and I'm like, Sean, what do you need? You want me to, like, so Rosangela's pregnant, so now they can't fly. So either he's going to go by himself, or, like, I was like, should we drive? He goes, let's get a van. Let's do, like, and all those things put together really make, I think, the best champions.
You notice it in how they carry themselves too.
Yes.
It's funny. I think the biggest difference is actually the coaching in other countries. In other countries, people tend to put, like, practice and the metaphysical aspects of sport first. And it's funny, they take way less credit than they do in America. In other countries, coaches are a lot more similar to me, where they're, like, quiet, off the face of the earth, and just, like, as long as the athlete takes care of me and all that stuff, I'm happy. I don't care. And put, like I said, emphasis on practicing metaphysics and, like, showing up to be the person you want to be. Mm-hmm. Where in America, I've noticed it's much more of a math game, where it's like, as long as you do X, X, and X, it must equal Y. And then I also notice in America, it's people, like, tooting their own horns, like, look what I've done for this person as their coach. When in reality, like I said, they were going to do it anyway, buddy.
They're, like, the ones doing it.
Yes.
They also had to eat the meals. They had to take the shots. They do the training sessions. They had to do it. You were just the guide.
Mm-hmm.
But that's still great, but don't be overly proud about it.
Yeah, and biology's smart enough that it's going to get there no matter what. You know what I mean? Like the difference between low carb and high carb is what you're eating. Like if you want to lose fat, you go through beta oxidation. Like if you do or don't eat carbs, and that might be a little different for you and me and him and them, but the same results occur from all diets.
Yeah.
It's like you burn less fat or burn more fat than you store. That's just simple. It's like you can do that anyway.
And it's in and out. Did you burn more calories or did you not? You know, are you in a deficit or no? I'm sure it's way more complex than that. But no, that's it's so true. I really hope we do start to take on some of those, being humble. The best champions are humble. Sean is one of the nicest guys. You know, we've had some Devin was here, such a nice, quiet, humble guy. But that's what I love about those the ones on Instagram that win and they're like, yeah, I did it. Yeah, they tend to be dicks in person. And the ones that are like quiet, humble, like you would love to, sit down and drink a beer, get dinner with them. But those are the ones, at least from my own life experiences, that go the freaking hardest. Like when it comes to the gym, this dude, when he's on that arm wrestling table, he's literally like, he's willing to break his arm and die. And I asked him about it, and he was just like, I was ready. Like, his wife is sitting next to him. He's like, I was ready to have a heart attack and to say, well, I'm officially not the best in the world anymore. You know what I mean? And like, they go to a crazy place, but then all of a sudden, like, they come back down to earth, and they're just this super quiet, nice, stupid flies, super quiet, nice, humble people. That's what I want to be. I want to be the guy that like is an absolute savage with whatever I do. And then when you come home and you meet me and, eventually my wife and my family, it's just like, oh, he's like the most normal, nicest guy. I don't want to be this persona.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny. I'm a nerd, so this made me think of it's like those big changes, like it's called fluxing, is the most important general concept to apply to anything you want to do, in my mind. For example, like if you want to lose fat at a rapid rate, you need to be exceptional at first, not storing fat. You know what I mean? Like you can't jump. So if you start at the bottom and you don't want to store fat, you need to get really good at not storing fat. And then the next step is going to involve you getting really good at liberating fat. And you need to go up and down. Like think about your heart rate in training. It needs to go up and down. The more up and down it goes, probably the better.
Mm-hmm. Now, we'll touch on that a little bit. So like I'm, as you know, I'm on my weight loss journey. When you have an athlete, and I'm curious as if you have, because it seems like a lot of your, let's restart this question. Have you had any athletes that needed to have major recomposition phases?
Mm-hmm. So before I did all the private stuff, I worked with a ton of people in the general public. I've helped people all over the world do a lot of different goals. With males and females, I've had probably 2 to 4 people total in each category lose over 100 pounds, like over a span of a long time.
Of course.
And what I've noticed is the biggest mistake that you can make in any long-term goal, like let's say you want to gain 50 pounds of muscle because you're a skinny guy, is that it seems odd, but it's like you're playing Monopoly, right? They're not going in a path that yields those results. So what I always tell people is reverse engineer things. So it's easy to figure out how to go from phase 1 to phase 2. To make small jumps, it's really easy, right? But what's hard is to look at long periods of time and fill in the gaps. So if you just go backwards, you can figure it out much easier, whether it's programming or anything in life. Let's say you want to get to a certain fat loss goal and it's like 10% body fat. Then you ask yourself the question, well, what's going to get me from 13% body fat to 10% body fat? And maybe it's like, oh, well, once I get around this body fat range, like I notice my heart rate spikes. So the last little bit of fat that comes off for me has to be done with things that decrease my heart rate. Well, it's like, well, then before that, what got the heart rate up? Well, it was like from going from 20% to 13%, I noticed I just needed to push myself and burn fat and calories and stuff. And it's like, okay, so then you get to 20. And then, well, before you can burn fat and calories and do a ton of work capacity stuff, you need to have have a liver that can sustain that. Because if not, then you're not going to be able to do all that work. And then you're only burning fat from the first 20 minutes of your cardio session, not the full 40 minutes you were on the treadmill. And there's a big difference there. You know what I mean?
And it's a waste of time.
Yeah, so I've noticed that's probably the biggest thing in general people struggle with when it comes to like those long journeys, whether it's going from like a low tier professional to a high tier professional in any sport. It's the same type of long journey, and you need to, in my opinion, make reverse engineered steps.
So basically find the end goal and just work your way back. And it's interesting you said that, because I woke up this morning. It wasn't one of those good days where I felt like I was on crack because of my CPAP. It was more of one of those like, I get to work. So I'm in the shower and I'm waking up and the whole shindig. And, I'm thinking about on November 5th, I want to qualify for the Arnold. And I'm like, all right, I know what my like peak end performance, physical and mental state is going to be. And I know what I have to do to get there. And then I was just like, all right, so I think I'm 11 weeks out. So like week 11 is going to look like this, and week 10 is going to look like this. And then like all of a sudden I got to week 8 and I'm just like, I can't do this anymore. Like what am I, like where we have to fill this gap in it. But it can be difficult, to try to work your way back. And that's why sometimes you need a coach to help you along the way. But yeah, at least for me in my weight loss journey, and because this is actually my second time, unfortunately, losing 100 pounds, because I got down to 275 once, and I started at 378. So I lost 105 pounds in a year. Now, the highest I got to this time was 406, with a lot more muscle, thankfully. But I fell into I was doing my first Strongman. I was like, I'm going to be big, and I'm going to be strong, and it's going to be awesome. And now I'm like, all right. And then I'm like, and I want to live past 50 now. So we're going to come down a little bit. But I think, and I know I'm falling into one of these patterns right now, is like my diet has been like relatively perfect, and I've been doing keto, and and everything's going really well, really well, really well. And now I'm like hitting one of those plateaus, and I'm like, but it works. But I'm like, but it's not working right now. And that's the differences that I think a lot of people forget to make. And that's where I'm like, so what is the step? Like, do I do a little carb manipulation for the next 6 weeks? Do I change the way I'm training? Because like with me, with my diet, like I really like being on low carbohydrates because I feel good, versus when I'm eating higher amounts of carbs, even like mild amounts of carbs, I have a little more like mood swings, and like I get hungry very often, versus when I'm having, just like loads of, beef, fish, chicken, kind of holds me over for a longer period of time. I'm like, well, I'm getting my protein in, So yeah, we definitely need to look into reverse engineering, as you say.
Yeah, it's passing the baton, and so many people want to jump from the first leg of the race to the last leg of the race, because everyone usually starts with the right mindset. They're like, I'm going to take this slow.
I don't mean to cut you off, but this just blew in my mind. Today's culture, especially in there, and I'm going to do my first show, and at this stage, I'm going to be taking all of this.
Yes.
And now all of a sudden, well, why don't I just do that for all 8 weeks? And then all of a sudden, their body goes to shit. Nothing's responding. Nothing's working. They're not looking the correct way. And they're like, but I'm taking everything.
Yeah, I've seen people come to me with the lowest HDL value I've ever seen was 4.
Wow.
And that's scored out of 40 to 50 typically. So really low. And that's kind of how I started seeing that trend, because people almost always start with the right mindset. They're like, this isn't going to happen overnight. I can do this. I'm going to get disciplined. And they almost always start right. But then when that first plateau comes around, or maybe they're more disciplined the second, or eventually it comes and they're like, F this, I want it now.
Yes.
And that's
I'll take more.
Right? And it's because you aren't seeing the little batons that need to be passed, and kind of like I said earlier, giving yourself the reaffirmation that this is right, So it's like maybe that intermediate portion of your bodybuilding prep is when you're probably should just be training the hardest and actually probably feel close to the crappiest, because that's the last chance to build a little extra muscle. Your food's on the way down, but not down yet. So you can still make chronic adaptations nutritionally and get leaner, even though your food's in the mid zone. But you know what? It's the most monotonous. And then when you look at weeks of the plan, that's actually gonna be most of your bodybuilding prep. Most bodybuilding preps are boring as crap, except except the beginning and the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Because at the beginning, you're seeing like, oh, things are changing and I'm feeling good. And then there's that like 8 weeks of like, nothing's changing. And then there's those last 4 weeks where like, oh my God, everything's changing.
Yep.
You know?
Because you need to pass that baton. So when I talk to, because I consult with it's funny, someone asked me recently, who are the demographics of who you work with, like percentage wise? Like, who do you work with the most, the least? And over the years, it's changed. I actually work with the least amount of strongmen I've ever have. And they're mostly bodybuilders and powerlifters I consult with now. And it's funny, even more so now, I mostly consult with business individuals nowadays. It's like the vast majority of people I talk to are business individuals. But the bodybuilders I consult with, I constantly tell them, because it's a sport where sometimes your goal is anabolic, sometimes it's catabolic, in the sense of not build muscle or lose fat or whatever. It's more of, am I growing right now in the sense of things I'm adding, or am I just kind of gritting away and holding a shield and just trying not to die?
Yeah, you know? yeah.
So I always tell them, remember what the goal of this block is. And I'll tell them, sometimes the goal of the block is to get fatigued. You know what? Because what gets you to lose fat is when you have no choice but to lose fat. You know what I mean? And you need to put biology in a scenario where your brain hears the adaptation signals you're sending. And not to kind of go back to what I said earlier, how come, Tom Platz has this story I heard from one of my mentors, Broderick Chavez, where he was curling 40 pounds and the other guy next to him was curling 40 pounds. And the guy goes up to Tom and goes, how come I'm curling 40 pounds and you're curling 40 pounds and you look like you and I look like me? And he laughs at him and goes, because my 40-pound dumbbells are heavier. And the point is, he was doing a better job, right? So I think that's one of the things that resonates when it comes to making plans happen is, what's the goal right now? I don't care about any other goal besides this goal. If your goal is to get fatigued, I want you to be mauled. And if I tell you then the goal is, I want you to have the lowest possible heart rate during your cardio sessions, you better come back and give me some meditative heart rates while you're listening to like 432 hertz frequencies to get that heart rate down. And I don't want to hear that you're listening to metal during that cardio session. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And far too many people just focus on the end outcome and then look at themselves and go like, well, that's far away. Screw this. You know what I mean? Instead of seeing that there's 10 little mini goals along the way that line you up to that.
Well, I think that would help people too. Like I mentioned earlier, like I'm pretty goal driven. So if I had like landing points, we'll call them, I'm like, all right, so this week I need to do this. And I'm like, great. Cause that's where I falter, like where most people do. I'm like perfect example. I always told myself, so my birthday is now just under a month away. Today's the 9th, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, so on the 7th. So it's just under a month away. And I was like, I'm going to be 300 pounds by my birthday. I woke up today, I'm like 345. And I'm like, why did I set that on myself? Like, all I should have done is been like, I want to either A, look like this or feel like this or blah, 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 blah. And then be like, I started off good. I was like, wait, this week I'm going to lose 2 pounds. And then the next week but then all of a sudden I was like, but I got to get to 300 and everything goes to shit, because we lose focus of the small landing points and these small goals along the way. So have landing points and goals, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, and even think about what you were saying earlier about like having the right system set up. So it's like you did the math and you're like using your own bias. And I could lose at most this much fat per week. If I just do this for 52 straight weeks, I'll have to weigh this.
That's what I did.
Yeah,
That's
of course, right? That's what everyone does, right?
Like, if I just stay on keto, it will all melt off.
Yeah. But you don't think about like, what about the fact that, so let's talk about quickly like how fat leaves a fat cell. It happens in stages. So let's say this fat cell is filled to here. And let's say you're doing a very lowly aggressive diet. And this is why people say the long, low, and slow is the best, because you only reduce a little bit. But by reducing a little bit, you don't cause much change to the fat cell. But if you only reduce a little bit and there's no like side effect or spillover or remainder or other things to deal with, you do that for 9, 10, 12 months, you'll see results with very easy application, if you will. But let's say you want to be more aggressive. Let's say whatever. If you completely deplete that fat cell, a couple things happen. At first, the cell membrane becomes acutely rigid, and what you do to get the fat out of the cell causes ionic changes and chemical changes that cause it to draw water in. So the cell membrane gets hard and water comes into the cell because you can't change shape too quickly geometrically. So it changes to bring water into the cell so that the cell membrane can readjust, and then it excretes the water and shrinks to the amount of fat that was left. But if you think about what that was like one of those curves I was just talking about. It's like, oh, we lost fat, then we gained water, and then we gained salt, and then we lost fat, and then you see like that. So if you think about it, if you're actually losing fat at like that optimum rate per week, even if you are losing the fat, there's going to be points where you gain things that weigh more than fat, like water, like glycogen, like maybe you fill up a muscle fiber all the way because you had great training sessions. The math isn't adding up, even though the fat in milligrams may have been lost.
Yes, and then the scale fucks with you too, because you're like, but I gain, and that's a really funny thing because about 3 weeks ago, one of my buddies, he's like kind of been like my pseudo like coach right now. He keeps me accountable, at least for like I'll send him my weekly updates. And it was like I knew I needed a refeed. I ate like a shit ton of carbs and not clean ones either, like really dirty stuff. And what was great was I had been losing weight, and I was down to like 333. And I ate this food, and the stepped on the scale the next day, and I was like 340. But everything was like tighter, fuller, and I looked like I had lost another 10 pounds. But all of a sudden, my body did what it needed to do, and refilled back up. Glycogen storage were full, muscles were full, and then once again, I fell faulty of, well, let me do that again next week because it's gonna work, and it doesn't work.
So we build muscle in micrograms, we lose fat in milligrams, but we change water and glycogen in grams. Oh. So if you just like quickly go back to sig figs, it's like, wait a minute. So I can never measure muscle building? Yes, it's impossible to measure muscle building. Like true muscle building. It's happening in micrograms.
Yeah, you're never going to.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's how much you can change per day, your muscle fibers, is micrograms. It's literally nothing. Wow. And fat loss, let's say you want to lose 100 pounds of fat. That is, not great at math, but that's like millions of milligrams. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
It's like when you think about the rate of loss never matters as much as the maintenance and the continuation of it. So if you're mentally, and like, this is funny, when I talk about fat loss to everybody that I do consults with, I always relate it back to actually like their mental fortitude to not care about their progress at the moment. So it's like if you're in a state where you're very emotionally attached to the progress, let's actually take a medium level approach because you're not going to be able to handle the fast approach. Or if you're the type of person who's like, Andy, I'm a savage. If you tell me this is what's right, I don't care. We're just going to do it. Then we could take the aggressive approach. And then if you're the least amount of flexible, we'll call it emotionally, and you're like, if I don't see the number on the scale go down, I'm going to blow my brains out. It's like, okay, we're taking the slowest approach then. You know what I mean?
We're going to lose a half a pound a week.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And I think that's what I'm dealing with right now is I am if you tell me to eat shit, I will do it and it will work. But because of that, once I falter from it, things just kind of go all over the place. And also, like, I am genetically a person who loves to hold on to water. Like, I think what my fluctuation all the time is the water.
That's all it can be. Like, you can't fluctuate.
Like, you can't, because of what you just said, if you're gaining it in, what do you say fat is gained in what?
Milligrams.
I'm not gaining 5 pounds in fat milligrams in a 24-hour period, And that's why water manipulation is so important. But
well, and don't forget how weird math gets when your weight's up there. So, for example, my girlfriend and I are both going to cut weight for a powerlifting meet we're going to do. Neither of us have major weight cuts, but the numbers seem drastic because I'm going to be cutting close to 20 pounds, but I'm also 220. Where a girl cutting 20 pounds is a lot more stressful.
Yeah, someone at 150, yeah.
So now think about this. Let's say you gain 1% water weight from your cheat meal. You gaining 1% water weight is 3.4 pounds right now, whereas me gaining water weight is 2.2. I mean, my girlfriend gaining it is like 1.6 or 1.7. So sure, we all gained 1%, but if now we
my 1% is much different.
Yeah, so if you stepped on the scale and you saw 3.4 pounds, it would be more difficult for you to dissociate from the fact that the three of us actually had the same exact change.
Very interesting.
I mean, that's also why you can lift more weight, right? It's like, well, you have bigger bones, you have bigger muscles attached to the bones. Yes. You can load more weight on bigger things, so it makes sense.
Oh, I never thought of it that way. Because we all just like, oh man, we play the game of like, well, I can gain weight really easily, but I can also lose weight really easily. But what is the weight?
So, yeah, we're pretty much all losing the same weight.
We're all the same way.
Damn
it.
Yeah.
Oh, we thought I was gifted. So this is a new segment I wanted to bring to the Signature Cast, and I think you're the perfect person to bring it about. So this is the Pick My Brain. So Annie, are there any questions you have for me, whether it's about the gym, whether it's about training, my life, just in any way I could help you or bring light to any situation that you've ever thought of? And if there's none, it's okay. You can say there's none.
Well, I actually have a question. So your weight loss journey has been pretty awesome, So I think I started coming here either right when you were about to start it or had just started it.
Do you know roughly what month?
Last March.
So let me. August. Wait. Not this. Oh, last March.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So last March. So I really started in August.
Okay.
Because we went to right? It was in August? Yeah. The Olympia last year was in August, I believe. And we went to the Olympia, and it was kind of one of those like shock and awe, like I need to get my shit together experiences. So yeah, actually, let me rephrase. August 6th, so 3 days ago, was when I started my weight loss journey.
Wow.
Like officially was just like, I need to stop, fucking around, and I need to make this happen.
Cool. So in that year, you've made awesome progress. What do you think, other than the fact that you've done it before, what do you think was like the number one supportive variable to let you do that? Because you're a busy guy. You do a lot of work. I've seen you come in here in days where it's like, oh my God, Will's moving everything in the gym today and he looks like he's dead. And I know you do a lot of other stuff. So what, as far as balancing and being able to get through it, and you're obviously a smart guy too, so you can sit there and tell yourself like, oh, I had extra caffeine today. I had to work hard. I depleted myself of extra energy. I could replete that same energy with a cheat meal today and still maybe lose fat technically. You see what I mean? Like, how did you scapegoat all the little pitfalls that you can get throughout the way?
Okay, so looking at, like, let's do it this way. Let's look at the first time I lost the weight versus this time, because I'm in a very different place. We'll look at the places I was in first. So the first time I lost all the weight was about 4 years ago, and I went from 378 to 273, which is 105 pounds in the year from one birthday to the next birthday. And I basically just, took a lot of supplementation, took a super aggressive approach with zero carbohydrates for like a year straight, and was super unhealthy and didn't do it right. And everything was crap. But I was fresh out of college, didn't have as many responsibilities, wasn't working as much, so I could cook all my meals and do all those things and really be focused on me. Didn't have to worry about bills that much. I kept putting off my school loans, that type of stuff. So it was really like a good environment for me to do what I had to do, but I didn't do it healthy. Fast forward to now, looking at my lifestyle, I'm here 5 days a week, but I'm also here on the weekends. I have my girlfriend I've been dating for 5 years. We're now in our first apartment for the past 3.5 months. Responsibilities that are all-time high. So compared to last time, I took the same approach as in I'm going to do a low-carb diet, first and foremost. I knew that was how my body responded well to at least really starting to chip away at the fat. Second, I looked at my supplementation. I was like, let me reduce everything and really make sure I'm doing the bang for my buck with what I'm intaking, and so I can really achieve in the most healthy way possible the physique that I want to achieve. So the first was, what did I just say? Oh my God, my brain just farted.
You had your responsibilities in line.
Okay, so I had
supplementation.
So I had all my responsibility in line, and I knew I had to do keto. Second, I knew I had to do it as healthy as possible with all of my supplementation. And then the third was my training. So within that whole entire time frame, I had already competed. I believe I had already competed in my first, relatively larger strongman competition, and did well. And that was good. Blah 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 blah. But I was like, everything hurts, so I wanted to feel good. So we had, life in order with the keto. Supplementation was down. The training, I kind of was like, let's feel good in the gym. And then the last part about it, and this is the factor that changed everything, which we talked about prior, was my sleep. Because let's call it sleep/stress. We were opening this in September, the Strength and Conditioning Center. I was still probably weighing August, September, probably, I want to say I was 390. And way overly caffeinated, way undersleep, way overstressed, and so many hours, like 60-hour weeks. And I'm like waking up and my heart is racing. And I'm a big proponent of donating blood like every 8 weeks to try and just thin yourself out. And I go to donate, and they tell me that my blood pressure was like 155 over like 90, which for some people would be like, I wish I had 155 over 90. Like, that's wonderful. But I've always been, even when I was at like 350 and up, I always had like 120 over 80. And I looked and I'm like, well, great. So like my systolic over diastolic. So my diastolic was starting to, my lower number was starting to rise. And like you look into the research, and it's basically, that's lifestyle. Like, there's something going on most of the time. Lifestyle is affecting you. And that was my like wake up and okay, time to get my CPAP. Time to really like, and so I had this new goal. It wasn't about losing weight because I wanted to lose weight. It was like, I'm freaked out. I don't want to die, even though I was nowhere near death. But I didn't want to continue on this path of like, I know people who are on blood pressure meds. I'm sure you have tons, especially those like high level, like big strongman athletes. I didn't want to have to be on blood pressure meds. I didn't want to have to worry about bending over to tie my shoelaces and having a headache and trying to walk up a flight of stairs. So the key factor was the health, stress, and sleep. And so I got my CPAP. I started getting 7 to 8 hours, and all of a sudden the fat started falling off a lot faster. The muscle started growing more, and my stress was drastically being reduced. And I really do pull that all back to my sleep, because as you know, if you're not sleeping, you're not recovering. And everything that's happening physically and in your brain isn't resetting itself to where it's supposed to be. So number one, I know that was a super long question, a long answer, but for me, the biggest difference I saw was my sleep. I think if I had done, because I've known I've had sleep problems since back when I was a senior in high school. I think if I had made this decision then, I'd be a completely different individual. I think I would have focused more in college. I think I would have achieved more physically, mentally, emotionally, in every single way, because even your emotional state obviously is affected by your sleep. I think I would have been on a much different path if I had just come to the terms that I needed a CPAP and, forget if the person next to me is embarrassed or not. I don't care. Like, it's so important. And now, like, if you were like, Will, I need you to gain muscle in the next 6 months, I'd be like, I can do it. As before, I'd be like, dude, I can't gain a pound of freaking muscle in like a month. I don't know what's happening. And the sleep was just so important. So that was the main difference for me. 100%. Being able to sleep and feel rested was like life altering. Completely life altering, 100%. Yeah.
It's funny how everyone needs that kind of balance. And it's like, it's not that balance in the sense you need to work and rest the same hours, but you need to be able to balance out how hard you go at certain things. And it's not just like type A person hard. So for example, like if you're a lazy person, you need to diet harder. You can't get away with the same diet tactics that someone that does a lot of exercise can do. I've also noticed that when it comes to people making like these long-term changes, that they need to have their eggs and faith put in multiple baskets rather than just that one long-term outcome.
Yeah. I think what I've also done is, because this is my second time around, and I'm proud to say, I think I finally created long-term changes and habits. As were before, and I still falter, don't get me wrong. Like even last night, I was like, I had all my meals for the day, and I was just like starving, and I was just like, give me that bag of pretzels, and I just started just chowing down. But as a whole, where I used to go to food for like an emotional support and for a like physical boost, I don't anymore. I find myself wanting, because I enjoy this good, healthy feeling, I'm starting to crave that more than just eating the food for pleasure or, being big and strong and whatever it may be. Now it's like, let's see how, like now that I do arm wrestling, let's see how insanely strong and a savage I can be on that table and be able to go to my friends and be like, my blood pressure is still 120/80 and my cholesterol's good. I still get 8 hours of sleep. Every part of my life is good. Like that's kind of my new goal. And it's thankfully I'm creating a longer, I think, healthier habit because of it. We just said earlier, like you're 27, I'm 28. And we're almost in that next stage of life, the 30s or whatever you want to call it. So I really want to pin down these healthier habits now versus I think when you're 50 years old, it's really hard to change your habits.
It's funny. Someone asked me recently, I forget who it was, but like, what is addiction? He's like, or he or she, I don't really remember what it was, but they're like, what does it mean to be addicted to something? Like, how does that happen? Like, can you really do something once and be addicted forever? Like, what does that mean? Like, I was like, oh, I love these questions, right?
That's a great
I love
question.
getting down to the root of things. And I've realized that it's satisfaction is the way. I've spoken to people in the sports who have unfortunately fallen to like chronic recreational drug use and not like just like smoking weed on the weekends or popping an edible, like legitimate.
Like serious stuff.
Yeah, like serious stuff. And speaking to them, I've asked them like, well, what happened, and it gets to a point where it was the only thing they loved. And I've also spoken to athletes in the same sports who maybe do recreational drugs like 1 to 4 times a year, and they're totally at peace with it. And it's like, what's the difference between these two?
Yeah.
And you start to realize that it's satisfaction that drives what you do next. So it's funny, in your first weight loss story, you were saying that the only satisfaction you were going to get was from losing the weight. And if the number on the scale went down and my inches went down, like that was all that freaking mattered. And now you get satisfaction from good sleep, healthy relationships, all these other things in your life. And it's not a surprise that you see them growing. It's very difficult to get better at something you absolutely hate. You can grit through it. It can be difficult in the moment, but if you're authentically invested and enjoy the fruits of your labor in something, you will see progress.
Yeah, that has been the main difference I actually just talked about this with, I don't remember who it was. It might have been one of the coworkers here, but I showed them a photo of me as a child, and I was maybe, let's say, like 5 or 6, skinny like this with a bobblehead. I mean, this is a big head. I mean, a head and a bunch of chopsticks. You know what I mean? And when my parents got divorced, I think I was the age of 7. My mom said that that's when I discovered food. And I think that became my emotional connection with feeling good and also culturally, I'm Greek, so it's like, here you go, sweetheart, here's some baklava, here's some food, and you're going to feel better. Just eat this, right? And I've stuck with that forever. And even now I still, occasionally falter to the, like, when I'm like depressed, or just kind of just having a crappy day, I'm like, man, for me, it's carbs, which is like, I wish I was addicted to, like, I don't want to use the word addicted, but, like, got that response from, like, apples or like, give me some celery sticks, whatever. No, but of course it's like, if you give me a loaf of bread, I am like happier than a pig in shit. Like a nice loaf of Italian bread, I'm like, I don't need anything on it. I'll just eat the bread. It'll be great. But yeah, I think that's where my connection happened. And you're right. But now I'm getting, really happy with feeling good. And that was an interesting thing that Devin said on the last podcast with his training. He's a big believer in your training should always feel good. He never actually ever goes to failure. He never pushes himself beyond that point. He always, this is a newer thing for him, but he always wants to feel good at the end of the training session. And he'll push really hard, but he never goes to the point where he's just like, I don't want to say the word in pain because of you know the pain I'm talking about. Like, I guess more of a, like, that was such a hard set pain versus like he's not having joint or muscular issues.
Or like things that put off stop signs.
Yeah, he doesn't want to ever get to this, like, that alert happening in his body. He just always wants to leave feeling good. And I think that's where my life kind of is right now, is I'm in this, like, I like feeling good. You know, I like when I lift in the gym, I used to try to put, like, Andy, I don't think I've benched in like 5 months. Cause I'm like, why? You know, I'm like, let's go do some shoulder raises and curls and have a good pump and walk around and feel good versus, you know, that'll be there when I want it to be there, you know?
It's funny. Someone, when I was at Live Golf, asked me, like, what makes certain athletes so much better than everyone else? And I'm like, they do the right thing. They're like, oh, what do you mean? I find that the people who get the results intuitively find out stuff like that along the way if they want to be successful and want to be married to that success.
Yeah.
And if you truly got more satisfaction out of bench press than just feeling good, you're going to end up bench pressing in lieu of losing more weight. You know, like similar with that paradox you said we had with bread and bad food. It's like, right now it's like probably like this 50-50 battle of like, I love feeling the way I feel, but have you seen that like honey and molasses drip off the baklava? And it's like,
Exactly. You're like, you know, I can lose 5 more pounds, but I'm going to Philly this Friday, and that cheesesteak, like, just look at the cheese.
Yeah,
like, it looks so good.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So Andy, we've taken a massive journey here. And first, I gotta say thank you so much for taking your time out to come on today. But I have 1 or 2 more questions before we wrap it up. And I think one of them for the people at home, because all right, so what we know now is that Andy, you are gonna hack people's brains, you're gonna make them the most focused, you're gonna get them to where they want to be, but it's up to them to do the work. You are their shepherd. And we are gonna get them on that journey. But what about you? What about Andy Triana? What is your next physical, mental, and financial goal for the year 2023?
Love it. Physical, I'll answer first because you said it first, and because it's the one that came to mind first. Like in the last year or two is when I've really had like these big business changes and opportunities, and like, you know, I think at one point you saw me. I was like literally flying for like 4 straight months
Every day.
Yeah.
Like, I'll see you next Friday. I'm like, but you just got here. Yeah, I gotta go.
Yeah, and I was like late to everywhere, right? That was new for me, and up until that point, I'd basically been able to live the pro athlete lifestyle, like because I was doing only coaching online for my job for quite a few years. It was like train when I want, answer emails when I want, just get it done. And I was fine with that, but I kind of lost that physical competitive edge. Like I love being a freak, and like, you know, there's a difference between feeling good and being a freak. I never lost feeling good, but I lost being a freak amidst that. You know,
Everybody wants to be a freak every once in a while,
right?
Yeah.
You need it, and this year has been huge on within being a freak, also getting better at friendships outside of social media. Because, you know, a lot of people I work with, I can't even bring them up on social media. And it's a bad idea for me, too. And I also realized, like, these people also don't use social media. Like, so a lot of people I work with, and, like, why is that? And I was like, you know, one of my favorite people I see quite often is one of the best athletes in his sport. And he will only answer the phone if you talk to him genuinely. Like, if you text him and you're like, gotta do this, won't answer. But if you say, hey man, I hope your day is going well, he'll respond in 20 minutes or less.
I love that.
And I started...
That's so genuine.
Yes. And I started applying that like physically in training and also with my friends. So instead of like liking someone's story and be like, yeah, talk to my friend, I'll call them on the phone or I'd be like, yo, what's good? You know what I mean? And I started doing that with my training too. It's like, sure, I accepted the fact that I had to skip 2 sessions last week or 2 weeks ago now, just because I think you saw me. I worked that much like for the golf things.
They came back tanner than freaking leather over here.
Yeah, right. It was like that. So I've accepted the fact that there legitimately may be certain weeks where I have to skip a session or 2. But what I don't have to do is I don't have to have any sessions that aren't exactly how I want them to go, that aren't completely inundated in effort to a singular goal for those 90 minutes. And I don't need to say that for these 90 minutes, anything is more important than the training. So I'm going to be doing a powerlifting meet in December, and that's really gotten me to be like where I want to be physically.
Okay.
And it's funny because similar to you, it's a state of feeling that I want.
It's not as much physical anymore as it used to. For me, I used to want to I want to look like that guy. Now I'm like, I just want to feel.
Yes.
Period.
Right? Yes.
And how numb does that sound? Like, I just want to feel.
Well, we've both found a chance to lift some cool numbers, accomplish some things. It's funny. I literally didn't acknowledge that 5th place at Worlds placement until recently is a good thing. For years, I was so mad about it, and it's just how it is, and you don't realize how that drains you. So that's my physical one. My mental and spiritual human one is kind of more related to I want to have a bigger bandwidth between my stress capacity and relaxation capacity. I notice sometimes as stress gets high, it actually stops me from relaxing. And if I relax enough, I end up getting lazy. And I want to have a more dichotomous balance, For example, the days I'm overworked, I actually sleep terribly. And then if I sleep good enough for multiple days in a row and cancel a few calls or whatever, then I immediately get lazy. So I want to have more of a fluid balance between the two because, for example, after the golf thing, I took 3 or 4 days off. Not off, but just drastically reduced my workload. And I was like, wow, this is nice. I can do this forever. And it's well, no, you can't. Time to get back on the horse, buddy.
Yeah.
I wish that was a little easier or a little more smooth. And financially, I want to get into my 30s having made enough money or making enough money that I can only focus on the business accolades and not have to worry about paying bills as much. I want to be at this point, I don't want to have to worry about who I'm charging what. I want to just worry about my goal for a long time is I want to be the #1 sports professional of all time, sports performance professional. And I think I'm actually well on my way. But that's my ultimate goal. So when I get into my 30s, I want to be taken care of enough financially. That's all right, the only reason I'm working is to say I'm the best.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's kind of been my in the back of my head. I told you. No, I don't know who I was telling. I was telling one of the people here. I really want to. I took a trip to Montana not that long ago.
Yeah, that was me.
Oh, I did tell you. And I'm that's where I want to raise a family and die. That place is awesome. But I'm in this mind state of okay. When I'm 35, I either want to have some residual income or be set in a place where where the money come from doesn't matter anymore. Just you still have to work, you still have to produce and do whatever, but it's let's not worry about the bills. Everything's okay. If I need to just shut off for 6 months, I'll be fine. I think that's where I want to achieve too. You got some good goals coming up, my man.
Hopefully, man. Hopefully. Everyone can think big. It's different to get there.
Yeah, exactly. Annie, thank you so much for coming on today. This was an absolute pleasure. I'm sure we'll have some very in-depth conversations soon because this is just the beginning. Thank you so much for coming on the SignatureCAST where we talk bodybuilding, business, and everything in between. The mic is yours. Please let the people know that if they want to reach out to you for either consulting, performance coaching, where do they go?
So right now, the only service I actively offer the public is consultations.
Okay.
You can reach out to gosuperbrain@gmail.com, and my assistant will sort you as far as getting you set up with a time, going through a liability assessment, setting you up with all that stuff. Truthfully, all my other time is taken up at the moment. But consultations via gosuperbrain.com or at gmail.com is the way to go. I did have a website, but I took it down. It was too much for me to handle.
Was it becoming a lot of people reaching out?
Oh, yeah, people were blowing it up. And it's also a lot, you think, I'm just going to open a website and it'll be fine. And it's certainly not how that works. Yeah.
Oh, man. Guys, that's another episode of the SignatureCAST where we talk bodybuilding, business, and everything in between. Andy, thank you so much for coming on our episode. We'll see you soon. Have a wonderful night, guys. See you later.